there's a kind of a problem with that basic idea that I can know when I'm in a spiritual state, whether there's actually a relationship between this feeling of I know and duality, actually.
Yeah, it's still part of the duality. Until it's not.
I think anytime these kinds of quandaries arise, you can look at it more closely and see that somewhere there is some dualistic idea at work. And the one I find most often, or very often in the people that I talk with, is this idea that conditions can be better or worse. And so we want to lean towards the better and lean away from the worse. So we're making a dualistic distinction. We're looking at our experience in any particular moment and assessing it as being better or worse. If we can transcend that kind of duality, the idea that experiences need to be categorized as positive or negative, transcend that and just be present with what's present without qualifying. You know, it's like people raising a question about fear. Well, what if there's something that arises and you don't call it fear? You just pay attention to what the condition is without attempting to fit it on a scale of 1 to 10. So it seems to me that if this kind of relates somewhat to what Michael was saying and also to what Gail was saying. If you consider that whatever this organism is doing is okay, must be okay, kind of like as John was saying, then you don't have the need to have a preference for what's taking place. In other words, you can be present with what's taking place without a quandary arising, without making a problem of it. Again, you know, it's kind of like Michael was saying, you know, the idea that if I do this, I'll be more spiritual. If I do that, I'll be less spiritual. These are ideas, just ideas about things. If you let that kind of dualistic thinking go, quantifying, qualifying, where's the problem? Swain Ang said in his poem, if there's nothing from the start, where can the dust alight? So if we were to go a little deeper into that, if there's no one there, then the qualifications aren't being made. So in other words, when these quandaries arise, look at it more thoroughly, and you'll see that there's some I thought in relation to the quandary. I'm having this problem, or I'm not having this problem. But the central figure is the I thought. So if one were to come to the place where this self-image dissolves, then who's the one who's at the center of the quandary?
Isn't that also, though, the problem with Robert was saying that, you know, don't have preferences, because the absence of that I seems deeper than having preferences or not. I mean, it seems like from the outward observer, somebody could have a preference, but it's just that there's no I at the center of it. It's just a preference going on. It's just, for whatever reason, it could be deeply biological, it could be, you know, whatever.
It's a matter of not even attaching or identifying with the preferences. Yeah. In other words, going beyond concern for what the organism does. Just objectively observing what's taking place.
Who's observing? Who is observing?
Well, that depends on your point of view. If from your point of view, all that is that, and all that's being done is that doing what it does, then it's that observing. So this is basically what I'm talking about when I talk about coming to a place where you're not identifying as the I in the proposition. You're actually identifying as that in the proposition. So let that worry about. You can put it another way, that there's no problem with the I as long as you know who or what the I is. In other words, I am doing this, I am doing that, but ultimately, in essence, what is this I that's doing? It's observing, it's concerned, it's making choices, and so on.
When I'm looking at John and I'm watching John behave, it's not John, I'm looking at John's ego. I'm looking at John's way he plays this image of himself out in everyday life.
Right.
There are times when I'm involved in it and I'm not, I become the ego. And then there are times, when I can and I kind of pull back from it and it becomes something that I'm observing, not that I'm participating in. Very clear.
But the observer is the observed. So, if you transcend those labels, those ideas of observer and observed, and just see the one thing that's taking place without even thinking in terms of observing, it's just something taking place. And what's the need to break that down into some distinctive category?
Once in a while, it just hits me like it's all just happening.
Exactly. We're highly conditioned to think in terms of moving towards the positive and away from the negative, and not simply suspending those kinds of qualifications, actually transcending them. So, be observant of that when that arises. I mean, there's always discontent. There's always the idea that things could be better, particularly in terms of the self. The self could be acting more appropriately or whatever, more ideally, more spiritually, and so on and so forth. Highly ingrained in us. Something you have to really just pay attention to that being there. Of course, if you don't, that's okay too. But, they talk about this condition as being effortless. No practice involved. Because there's nothing to get, nothing to gain. I mean, what we've got right here, right now, is it. What did Jack Nicholson say? This is as good as it gets.